Hello and welcome to this video on how to build and convert a heavy weapons team. I'll show exactly what parts I used. The only bit that wasn't a Games Workshop Imperial Guard part was the antennae bit, which was a guitar string. So this model was also magnetized, so you have the choice of the autocannon, the heavy bolter and the lascannon. A painting video will follow this in part 2. So let's get into it. Caesar Leva, I hope I got that pronunciation right, came up with the idea of creating a heavy weapons team with the Leman Russ tank crew and a narrative that they were survivors of a destroyed tank company. I thought this was a brilliant idea, and in this video I'm going to show how I attempted this. So thank you, Caesar. Please let me know what you think of my attempt. If anyone else has any ideas or suggestions they want to see, please let me know in the comments. I do try and go through them all, and I try and respond to all the comments everyone sends. To start, I got a load of bits together from the tank sprues, from the Chimera and the Leman Russ. I only wanted to use bits from the tank sprues, but in the end I had to use the weapons from the heavy weapons teams. Couldn't really find a way to incorporate the whole mounted heavy weapons from the tanks. In the end, I decided to base the whole model around a broken dozer blade that had come off a Leman Russ tank. To make the dozer blade look like it had completely been broken in half, I took the clippers to it. This helped the dozer blade actually fit on the base a bit better, and it gives the guardsman a bit more cover. I hadn't finished hacking away at this bit yet, so I took the clippers to the bottom of the dozer blade to make it look like it had been forced through the mud and pushed all the topsoil forward and left this wet earth behind it, which I tried to bring out with a paint scheme, as will be discussed in part 2 of this video. To further emphasise that the dozer blade had been forced into the earth, I wanted to compress the hydraulic piston. To do this, I simply cut out the piston arms and stuck it back together. To hold the broken bit in place, I do a bit of plastic pinning. To do this, I use the Vox caster, as any Imperial Guard player will have lots of these lying around. So I actually use the aerial of the Vox caster as the pin and drill 2 holes, and the rest is done as you'd pin a classic metal model, just by drilling into each part, putting the pin into one of the holes, fitting each end of the pin into each hole. Before gluing the part to the base, I sand down all the cut areas, and I do this by putting the sandpaper on top of the base so it doesn't sand down any of the area I don't want to touch. To make this model look a bit more dramatic, I'm keeping half of the dozer blade hanging off the edge of the base. So as these two guardsmen are survivors from a destroyed Leman Russ or Chimera, I wanted one of the guys to look like he was trying to make communication with HQ or trying to call for reinforcements or to get evacuated. To achieve this, I made him look like he was reaching his aerial as far forward as he could, trying to make communication. On the base, I got the aerial from one of the tank kits, and I'll go over this a bit later. But with this guy, the only bit that wasn't from one of the tank sprues was the left arm holding the aerial, which was actually from the heavy weapon sprue. The torso, shown in the top right, would be the best bit to use for this, but as I didn't have this bit, and I don't believe it's produced anymore, I had to use the torso shown with an X to it. This isn't as ideal because you have to hack it up and actually get the bit you want out, but this didn't matter too much in the end because I had to file down the bottom of the torso and the top of the legs to an angle so that it looked like the guy was looking up as he was leaning forward over the dozer blade. I also chopped up this guy's boots and repositioned them just to give more emphasis that this guy's really trying to lean forward. You can see how the legs now fit into the dozer blade and fit around the model nicely. All the gaps will require filling, and this will be done with green stuff a bit later on. Here I'm just shaving down a bit of the leg with the clippers so that the leg fits around the model a bit better. As this guy is leaning so far forward, he's more horizontal than vertical, and so the back of his collar is getting in the way of his head, so this is going to have to be shaved down so that the head can be positioned properly. Where the arm is glued to the torso, the position of the arm can be changed by simply shaving down a bit behind the shoulder pad. This is a great tip for all plastic Cadian kits. When modelling or chopping plastic bits, it can be a good idea to do the cleanup of the mould lines and all these bits at the same time once most of the model has been stuck together. Rather than change the angle of this arm, I decided to cut a piece of damage into the top of the dozer blade so the hand fits nicely into the gap. For the aerial, I used the Vox bit from the tank kit, and for the actual aerial bit, I used a guitar string. I used an E string for this, and it worked perfectly. Any guitar E string will do, it doesn't have to be slinky strings. I used super glue to glue the guitar string into the Vox. For the gunner dude, again I had to use the same torso bit, the bit shown here with the cross through it. If you can, use the bit to the right of that, as it's much easier to work with as you already have the piece you need. It's time to mix up some green stuff and fill all the gaps I've left from hacking all these bits up. I wanted to magnetize the heavy weapons so that it could be swapped out depending on what list I'm taking. For this, I used some small magnets with a diameter of 3mm and a thickness of 1mm. Different size magnets can be used depending on what you have or what thickness you're drilling into, and these rare earth magnets are more than strong enough to hold these weapons. Using magnets also has the added advantage that you are able to take the part away from the model during painting. When drilling holes for the magnets, you want to bear in mind that different weapons are different lengths, and therefore you want to be careful where you locate the holes. Some will need to be drilled further away from the gunner and some closer to the gunner, just so that everything looks right when you attach the gun to the model. Another issue that can sometimes crop up when magnetizing models is getting the polarity wrong when gluing the magnet into the model. So what I've done here is check the polarity with another weapon that I've previously magnetized. My technique here of pushing the magnets into the superglue with my finger is probably not the best, because superglue was actually designed to stick to flesh quickly. More specifically, it was used in the Vietnam War to quickly glue closed open wounds. So another bit of plastic is probably better to use to push the magnet into the gun. And of course, always remember that drilled barrels always hit more often. Before gluing the gunner to the base, ensure that he's the right distance away from the guns. As all three guns are slightly different in length, this will be a bit of a compromise. And finally, we move on to the basing. And here I'm using rocks, caulking and sand in such a way that it makes it look like the dozer blade has been forced through the earth, and again pushing the surface rocks to the front of the dozer blade. I use quite a bit of super glue, especially on the caulking, to solidify the caulking and make it easier for painting. When you're using this much super glue, make sure you've got good ventilation, because the fumes from this stuff is quite potent. For the sand, I mainly use PVA, but again I use some super glue in places just to solidify the sand in areas where it may be knocked and become loose. And now we've got some shots of the completed miniature all painted up. Thanks for watching the video, guys, and if you want to see part 2 where I paint this model, please let me know and I'll get on with that one next. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.